This weekend, the final film of Phase 5 of the MCU Thunderbolts drops in theaters. So let's talk about it. So if you're wondering, I am in fact wearing a popcorn bucket on my head. It fits pretty well. It also is very uncomfortable. Anyway, while I'm talking, be sure to join me down below in the comments section. Let me know what's your excitement level for Thunderbolts. If you've seen it, what did you think about it? As for me, this is a project I've been excited about pretty much since they announced it. A lot of people heard the premise and they went, oh, so Marvel's Suicide Squad. But I went, yeah, what's the problem with that? The idea of getting the bad guys or the rejects to be the heroes didn't originate with the Suicide Squad. I mean, it's a pretty classic storytelling template. They did the Dirty Dozen back in the 1960s and had a group of prisoners go battle the Nazis. And so it's just a fun way to treat a hero story in a team-up movie with rejects. And in the case of this one, they were pulling a bunch of side characters that I had a lot of fun with in the projects they were in. Maybe they weren't the best projects, but I liked the characters, so I was always kind of optimistic about this one, and then every single trailer kind of made me go, yeah, that's what I was hoping that this movie would be, and I had really good vibes about it going into it. Did it live up to my expectations? Let's get started with the good. And I'm very happy to say that I thoroughly enjoyed Thunderbolts. And it feels like a proper MCU film that's good without needing a gimmick or James Gunn. Like last year, had a great time with Deadpool and Wolverine, but that's more of a Ryan Reynolds film, and it's a celebration of the Fox X-Men universe, and of course, it has a bunch of multiverse cameos and stuff. It's a gimmick. It was very entertaining, but it had a gimmick to it. Or even a couple years back, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I think is a great film, but it's like a James Gunn send-off to the Guardians of the Galaxy. Of course, it's MCU proper, but it's not like tied into the main storyline that they're doing right now. And it did have that element of James Gunn is leaving and sending off these characters. With Thunderbolts, it feels like we're just bringing a new team together, telling a story that's very much at the center of the current world of the MCU, and it's good without needing a gimmick. Likewise, in my review, I can feel like I can say, it's good, and I don't have to immediately go, but... Thunderbolts is good, but it's fun, but I just watched it and I went, I just really enjoyed that. That worked on a lot of levels as just a movie. And in a lot of ways, this film is kind of like Earthbound Guardians of the Galaxy, where it's a bunch of lonely losers that find their family together. What I don't mean when I say it's like Guardians of the Galaxy, it doesn't have James Gunn humor, though it has Marvel humor, but it doesn't have James Gunn humor, and it doesn't have a James Gunn soundtrack. It doesn't do that at all. I thought it might because of the sound, because of the trailers, which I was excited for because the trailers had the Toadies in it. I thought the Toadies might be in the movie. Spoiler alert, they do not have Possum Kingdom by the Toadies in the movie. But it's all score. It's not James Gunn humor. When I say it, it's like Earthbound Guardians of the Galaxy. The whole point of the movie is that they're the D team. The whole point of the movie is that these are terrible heroes. The whole point of the movie is that a bunch of you don't know who these characters are. You can't name them off. That's not like a oops. That's not a defect in the concept. That is the concept of the movie. That's what's being explored in the film. That's what's acknowledged by the people that pull them together. That's what's acknowledged by the characters themselves. They themselves think that they are losers and they suck. But it's it's a found family story.
It's about characters, and is there something specific to those characters that bring them together and something that they're going through that isn't, the most traditional superhero, story to be told.
And kind of to that point, one of the things that immediately you notice about this film is that it's an MCU film that's actually about something. The exploration of themes, things like that, it's like very overt from the very beginning of the film. Yelena is our lead character. She's the person that we're following as our perspective of the teen. It makes it very clear that she's lonely and she's missing purpose. Very clearly, the movie is exploring depression. Very clearly, it's exploring mental health and the importance of community. And that's not just like a thing that's kind of hinted at. It makes it very clear just how broken and alone and lost these characters are. And it keeps kind of going back to that. And even the villain that they choose and the way the conflict escalates in the back half of the film, it ties into an exploration of actual ideas, which makes it an MCU film that just feels weightier, heavier, more mature, and like it actually has something to say. It's not just a roller coaster ride, though it's a lot of fun. It's not just an action film, though there's a bunch of action. It's a movie that's actually exploring something. And also to that point, it's one of the most character-based MCU films that we've gotten, because we're sitting down and being like, what is Yelena's life like? What does she want? What does she value? And we're telling a story that helps her discover the best in herself. Like, it's not just a character arc, but it's like diving into her psyche and why is she so broken? Why is she so alone? Why does she have so much regret? And, it does that, most, like, she has the most screen time for it to do that, but it's doing that with John Walker. It's doing that with Red Guardian. And of course, we know Bucky and his troubled past, and so it doesn't need to tell us some of that stuff again, but it's in there as well. So it's a character-based film that's exploring loneliness, purpose, depression, mental health, regret, in a film that is about these lovable losers finding community. And so it feels like an actual cohesive film that has all the different pieces that you want.
And in being that specific becomes something universal, so that there is a real clear take and perspective on these characters, and there's a specificity to it that in the end, obviously we want to make a big universal movie that everyone can connect to, but that you can only do that by making something that feels personal.
And then also kind of along those same lines, it's an MCU film that has a distinct style and a unified vision to it. One of the criticisms that myself and many other people have had of a number of MCU projects over the last 5 years is that they end up feeling directed by committee. There's kind of this generic feel to it. It's just MCU stuff. With the story, it feels like things were moved around, and so it just doesn't always kind of fit. The pieces don't always feel like they fit together the best. In something like Multiverse of Madness, half the movie feels directed by Sam Raimi, and half the movie feels directed by someone completely different. There's like very distinctly very Raimi sequences, and other ones are very different. I didn't sense much of any Nia DaCosta in the Marvels, and she's pretty much openly said that in interviews by now, that it was like, yeah, that's really a Kevin Feige film that, I was there on set, but they have so much control I couldn't do much. And then you watch the Thunderbolts, and it's a movie that, as I said, it actually explores ideas and introduces idea at the beginning that's paid off at the end. It's a movie that has practical stunt work.
I suppose you technically don't need Florence to step off of the second tallest building in the world, but if she wants to do that, then I would not get in her way if she decides she's going to make that happen.
Throughout the first half in particular is like more grounded for the MCU, grounded for the MCU film with practical stunts, people jumping off buildings, things like that. It has a darker tone. It has a darker look to it. And as you move into the third act, it does something very different with our final battle, final conflict, where it kind of has this trippy, horror-inspired nightmare thing that it kind of does with part of its finale that is unique and different.
There's a lot of grounded stuff in this movie and a lot of grounded action. There is a whole surrealist side to the film, and I think that traditionally in this world, you might, lean pretty hard on visual effects to do that. Can you build practically an entire surrealist world that has like gravity shifts between every space and every transition is practical, or at least close to it in camera, that's just sort of augmented by effects?
And so it feels as if they actually trusted the writer-director to put out a film. It doesn't feel fixed in post. It doesn't feel reworked to death. I had been worried about this because in some interviews, a couple years back when David Harbour was promoting Gran Turismo, he said,
I mean, we were, I think, gonna go, and then I think they did want the opportunity to change some stuff. The script we have is really tight and really great, and our director, Jake, thinks it's great, but they just want the freedom. They don't want to be stuck in the middle of a shoot and then having to go like, we can't rewrite this.
And the they there is not the writer, it's not the director, it's the MCU Parliament, the higher-ups. And that made me really nervous about the project. But it seems like by the time they made this movie, they got the process right, which was you slow cook the script so you don't need to fix it in post. And they reworked the script like before they made the movie, rather than having to redo the movie after they've made the movie, which David Harbour says is what they did with Black Widow.
They do rework stuff, even big productions. Like Black Widow, the entire third act was reworked as we were shooting.
With this film, that's not what it feels like. There weren't rumors, reports of extensive reshoots, reworking the movie, rewriting the movie. It was none of that. That they had a script that everything seemed to go very straightforward and clean once they started filming. And it feels like that when you're watching the film. One of the nice little touches in the movie is during the third act, there's a montage of our Thunderbolts saving a bunch of people and stopping them from danger as the music swells and the heroic theme plays. And it's the sort of thing that's like classic heroism and, just old school heroes saving people. And you start to realize, like, sometimes the MCU forgets to do that they get so kind of lost in big spectacle and saving the world that sometimes they forget to have our heroes save a person. And this movie remembers the power of when you see a city in danger, that means there's a bunch of individuals in danger. And when a person is saved, that's as personal as it gets. And it gets back down to that. Even if it's just the one little sequence, one little montage, the movie even calls it out of Red Guardians. What's great is when you're just saving people. And they put that in the movie. Another thing about it that I actually really enjoyed, I found the plot to be refreshingly straightforward, where you're kind of following Yelena through the course of the story, and there's not like a ton of locations. It's basically most of it either cutting between 2 or 3 different perspectives. And there's a straightforwardness to it that allows, instead of the plot and the complexities and the twists and the turns eating up the screen time, we're on this journey that's like a straightforward line. Therefore, we can have depth with the characters and we can pause to learn about them and explore them. We'll stay at a place longer than you normally stay in a movie like this. And that just allows time for the rapport to grow. And for little moments to happen between characters that can be paid off later on in the film or have a meaningful impact later on. Now, I said earlier that it's character-based, and so much of what makes the movie really work are the characters as individuals and their rapport together. The lead here, as I've mentioned, is Yelena. Like, she can be funny and she can do dramatic stuff, and it's a role that kind of asks all of that of her, that it's a person that just has deep regrets. And as much as she can be cold, literally an assassin and a government fixer, she can pause and have like empathy for the people around her. Don't have to say much about Bucky because of course he's well established, but it's interesting. He's used in a manner that like he's the one that has, that's already famous and respected. And in the movie, he's treated that way as like he's the cool one, man. Look, Bucky showed up. Oh man, that's awesome. Of course, John Walker's in here. John Walker was one of my favorite characters coming out of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because he's what happened if in Captain America: First Avenger, Tommy Lee Jones got his way. If instead of they went with the humble weakling that hates bullies, they went with the alpha male that can be a bully. That's what John Walker is, and this movie in particular plays up that like he's just a jerk. And it like leans so hard into that. Like so much of it might be a facade and he has this forced bravado to him. He's like this jerk, and he kind of knows it, and thinks of himself as Captain America, but he's so not Steve Rogers. There's something really fun about that. And then Red Guardian, David Harbour is the one that just kind of brings just a bunch of energy and fun. He's meant to be this cartoonish, over-the-top character that is just obsessed with himself and the glory days and trying to recapture that. And so just like, he's the guy that just brings the big crescendo of fun into a number of different sequences, in particular, as the team starts to come together and they start to bond and everything like that. The one you can't really talk about, you don't want to say too much about him. We have Bob in here. Let's just say that Lewis Pullman, who plays Bob, I think he's going places. He was a really fun addition to the story and could play in the dynamic nicely, and also could lean into these other aspects of himself, of the character, really well. Couple other things to talk about on here. There are some horror influences in the film. Like, it's not doesn't go horribly far into this, but when you get into our villain, Void, and you start going to pretty dark places, I thought it was just kind of fun to see an MCU film that, in a lot of ways, is very straightforward, an action movie, but it also is able to kind of have this dark aspect to it. Trippy. This is an odd comparison in a lot of ways, but because it goes kind of dreamy in some stuff that it kind of does, there's a bit, Nightmare on Elm Street kind of vibes for a little bit of it. Vibes. Don't go read too much into that, but when you see where the movie goes with several different things that happen throughout the course of the film, and some things that happen later in the film in particular, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about with that. And finally, as an MCU film, you can feel the pieces kind of coming together. Like we're building towards something, gaining momentum. Now, I had a number of criticisms of Captain America Brave New World, but one of the things I said was you can feel the universe starting to come together, where they're pulling the threads tighter, and there's a little bit of a pointing towards where we're headed. Flawed film, but I did enjoy that about that film. And that only continues with this movie, where it's a film that just the inherent nature of it, we're literally pulling together side characters from a bunch of projects. So as soon as you do that, you can feel the universe feeling cohesive as people come together. You don't need to have seen Brave New World, but it references that film as if what happened down the road matters with what happens in this film. And as you get towards the end of this movie, and in particular where it goes with its post-credit scenes, you feel like there's the target. That's what we're moving towards. Yes, I like this. Where so many of the projects the last 4 years or whatever, you get to the end of it, you get the post-credit scene, and it teases Harry Styles shows up, or Hercules shows up, or Hulk has a son, and you're like, what does that mean? Where is that going? And it's just a dangling plot thread. Whereas this movie ends and you feel like, I understand better where we're headed. I can see what the goal is, and I'm excited for it. You end on this note of like, yeah. And so when people say the MCU's back, well, I think you need like longevity of consistency to be able to fully say that. But this movie ends and you have that feeling of excitement for the next one again in a way that I don't think they have done a great job with throughout phases 4 and 5. So for me, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. Easily one of the best MCU films of phases 4 and 5. There are a couple more things to talk about, so let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. As we go into these aren't necessarily good or bad things. They're just things you need to know going into the movie or frequently asked questions. First up, this is a much darker MCU film than typical MCU. There's child abuse in the film. There's actually murder of a child in the film, and these things kind of are returned to. It doesn't happen just once. It's kind of returned to some of this darkness. And it's a movie about depression, regret, loneliness. And so it leans into why these characters are that way and has sequences portraying some of that. And so like for me, I bought tickets for opening night to take my whole family. I will not be taking my whole family opening night to go see the movie because I just don't think it would be appropriate for my little girls to go see it. I took my 13-year-old son to go see it, but like, it's not an MCU film for all ages. It is more mature. It leans into that, which I would say is a very good thing, to not try to make every movie for everyone. But as someone that's trying to decide if it's appropriate for you as an individual, if you're more sensitive to like violence against children, or if it's for your family, you do need to know that. And then there's two questions you always have to answer when it comes to MCU projects. What do you need to watch before Thunderbolts? Honestly, there are several things that will improve your experience if you watch them, but I don't think these are actually mandatory movies and TV shows you need to watch to understand the film. I don't think you need to do a bunch of homework in order to understand this movie. It doesn't really continue the plot threads of a bunch of other projects. You just need to know who these characters are. And the movie itself pauses to tell you who each of these characters are and what their backstory is and why they're lonely, why they're a reject. And so it gives you the synopsis of the most important information to know about them.
I think, it starts with Kevin saying, hey, make it work if people haven't seen any of these things.
If you want to do the deep dive to really get it, Ant-Man and the Wasp introduces the Ghost character, so you kind of understand her backstory. Black Widow would be the most bang for your buck because it's the one that introduced Yelena, Red Guardian, as well as Taskmaster, and gives you kind of really understanding the dynamics of those characters. And then Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which gives you John Walker's backstory and the conflict with him and Sam, as well as the history with Bucky. Those are the ones that you kind of need to watch. This is an example of the movie feeling like the movies are coming together, but they did it in a way where it doesn't feel like you'll be confused if you haven't done your homework.
It's a delicate dance with, a great group of writers to try to find ways to, without it feeling like heavily expositional, to allude to things that people who have, when Yelena says, I thought it started when my sister died. So you're defining for a new audience that she has a sister that's died. Obviously, if you've watched these movies, there's a whole, wealth of emotional resonance if you know who she's talking about. Make it its own story, to have a full arc and not feel like you're being dropped in the middle of an installment.
Final one on here that people always ask, does Thunderbolts have a mid or post-credit scene? It has both, and you have to stick around until the very end. The mid-credit scene is just kind of a fun little joke. It paying off kind of where the movie ends. It's just a fun little sequence. Puts a smile on your face. One final joke. The post-credit scene is one that absolutely you want to stick around for. And it's a classic old school MCU post-credit scene teasing what's coming next. It's several minutes long. It plays as an epilogue for the film in like what's kind of gone on. And then it gives you a really fun tease for where things are headed. There's people that are claiming it's mind-blowing. It's the best post-credit scene they've ever done. I don't know if those people just weren't around during phases 1 through 3, or if they're just using way too much hyperbole. It's not the greatest post-credit scene of all time, but it's great in the way that we used to mean. It doesn't like tease just some, like, it's not Harry Styles showed up like, wow, Harry Styles is in the MCU. It's not that crap. It actually is something where you go, oh, I see where we're going with all of this. I see how it ties all together. And so it's that version that makes you feel like you know the target. You know what we have momentum towards. It's a classic, old school, good MCU post-credit scene. With that said, let's get started with the bad. And as I said earlier, one of the things I really enjoyed about this movie is that I watched it and I went, I liked that. That was good. And I didn't have an immediate, but there wasn't something about it that just stuck out that was just so obviously a problem with the film, or that irritated me, or went off in a direction that was like, oh, that's so frustrating. I didn't watch it and immediately think of a better version of the film. I just went, that was kind of cool. I really enjoyed that. They took some chances and they pretty much worked for me. So, a couple things that kind of noticed about it. The middle of the movie, it feels like maybe they trimmed like 10, 15 minutes out of the film. Either that or they just kind of rushed through a pretty important development of a character. And it feels like we have a really, in a very short window of time, have a pretty big jump with where a character is at. And so just a little bit of a mid-act cheat kind of happens in there. The way that movie's designed, and this is kind of called out in the film, but they chose a villain that doesn't really match the power set of our heroes. And I think that kind of wrote them into some corners that I think in certain ways makes it so they're not able to deliver some of what you kind of want from a movie like this. And, you know, when you're put into a corner, then you have to be creative. And I think they do some creative things to resolve things, the conflicts in the film. But there are senses of like, I don't know, like an underwhelming nature to how you have to overcome the threat in front of us because, as the movie says, everybody just punches and shoots. What do you do when you're facing a villain this powerful with these powers? Like, honestly, there just weren't a lot of things about the movie that bothered me or that I felt I needed to call out. I mean, maybe there's a little bit too much MCU humor. There's a couple parts where, you know, you can play out the logic of how much sense does this make and would this actually work? Could two girls physically, without super soldier serum, be able to actually help in several of these different circumstances with things that they have to do? And like you can nitpick some of that stuff, but at the end of the day, like it's a movie that I felt like it delivered what it was trying to deliver. It's not swinging for the fences. It's not trying to be the biggest and the best MCU film. It's trying to tell a more straightforward story that's about a bunch of losers finding family, that explores depression, loneliness, some other things like that. And it succeeds at that. It worked for me. It takes some swings. It does some things that I can really understand why some people wouldn't love the third act. I can see why it wouldn't work for some people because it's dark and goes to places that are pretty unsettling. I'd understand all of that if it doesn't work for you for those reasons. For me, it worked. Overall, it's an A-. It's an 8.5 out of 10, and it's must-see for our MCU fans. This is worth one seeing in the theater. It's a good one. You feel the universe coming together. Be sure to come back this weekend. I got a bunch of MCU rankings, content planned out. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.